Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Grossman of the Atlas Society, and welcome to the second episode of our Atlas Society Asks. As you may know, we've been doing Ask the Atlas Society episodes with our various student groups, but then decided, well, why don't we do the Atlas Society Asks with some of our friends and fellow Ayn Rand fans. And so I am absolutely thrilled today to welcome Sam Sorbo. Some of you may remember Sam from last year's Atlas Society Gala, where she absolutely rocked as our MC. It would take up the entire 20 minutes for me to tell you how many languages Sam speaks, let alone recount her storied career as an actress, a producer, an international model, and also an author of several books, including They're Your Kids, about homeschooling. Sam, welcome. These are kind of the worst of times, but in some ways, potentially the best of times, with a possibility of a renaissance in homeschooling. Tell us a little bit about your perspective.
Oh gosh, so I immediately started putting videos online about this COVID-19 shelter in place. Everybody is now accidentally homeschooling. And I tend to see silver linings anyway. I'm a very optimistic person. But I looked at this and I said, this is an opportunity for families to come together. And it's really an unprecedented opportunity for everyone in this nation and actually around the world to test drive home education and really, kick the tires and check the knobs and feel how comfortable the seat is, and see if it might be an opportunity for you and your family. And I'm already getting emails back from people, or emails from people, I should say, who are writing in, who are saying, we're not going back to the school system. We're not putting our children back in the institution. It's so much easier than we thought it was. And of course, that's been my message all along, is it's easier than you imagine, and it's actually more rewarding than your wildest dreams. So I've been home educating my kids for over 10 years. That's why I wrote the book. And now I have an opportunity to get that message out, because everybody's sort of tearing their hair out, wondering how are they supposed to get this done when this was never even on their radar.
So tell us about your story. I mean, did it take years of preparation? Did you plan, or did you just kind of jump in and give it a go?
Well, I jumped in and I gave it a go. But here's the thing. There are people who have been doing this for a very long time. And so I've been recently doing a lot of interviews for promoting coronavirushomeschooling.com, which is a website that's sponsored by the Texas Homeschool Coalition, which is one of the largest ones in the world. They've been around for over 30 years, and they've put together this online. It's not online, actually. They email it to your inbox every day, and it's more than a curriculum. It's all soup to nuts. It's the whole kit and caboodle. And I like to say, all you need to do is add the love. So that will teach parents how to go about the process of education. But what I like to tell parents is, first of all, if you feel incapable to educate your children, there's a reason for that. Because if you went to high school, you shouldn't feel incapable of teaching a young person, the basics. You went to high school, so you got the basics. And of course, the proof of an education is the ability to impart the knowledge that you have. So why are you feeling so incompetent? And I would argue you're feeling incompetent because you were taught that you don't know how to do anything that you weren't formally instructed by somebody standing at a blackboard or a whiteboard.
Yeah, and probably people feel sort of dread and incompetence and a lack of self-esteem because they also don't have a philosophy. They don't have guiding principles, and that's part of what is so helpful about discovering Ayn Rand. But so how old were your kids when you started? What was the first week like at the Sam Sorbo homeschooling household?
Well, my oldest had finished second grade, so we started for third grade, and it was just great. I would love to say that I never looked back. That's not really true. All of that's in my book, They're Your Kids. But I would say that the greatest thing about home education is that what you're doing is you are allowing the uniqueness of your child to prosper. Whereas when you send the child into the institution, he is one of 30, and so that challenges his uniqueness, right? And of
Yeah.
course, the idea behind Ayn Rand is that we each have our abilities, and we should be able to flourish with our individual ability in freedom. And so that's really sort of I noticed that you tried to make the tie-in with Ayn Rand, but that's why I'm such a fan of Ayn Rand. Here's a woman who grew up in communism and somehow managed to escape that mindset and discover that the intrinsic value of each individual should be applauded and should be put forward, and allowed to prosper, because through that, we all prosper, right? And right now, strangely, what are we doing? We're battling a virus that came to us from communist China.
Yes. Yeah. I
And
mean,
that
that's,
and honest, just for a moment, think of what we're doing. We're behaving as if we were Chinese. We're behaving right now. The shelter in place. Oh, the government told us we have to shelter in place. I'm doing it, but I got to ask, like, since when did we become the objects of the government to manipulate?
it's really interesting. We just came out with one of our Draw My Lives on My Name is Hong Kong. And I thought,
Mhm.
this is not going to hit because nobody remembers the Hong Kong protests. But it really did resonate because just as communist China suppressed the protests in Hong Kong, they also suppressed human rights, and they suppressed the truth about the coronavirus. And now the
Right.
rest of the world is having to pay the consequences. So, tell us a little bit, at what point or how do you incorporate any of Ayn Rand's literature, at what ages? But more broadly, like, what are the best resources for homeschooling? You mentioned the Texas homeschooling group. Where would somebody start? Like, well, they
So
would start by reading your book, number one, and listening
number
to
one,
the
and
audio.
I have it right here.
Okay.
Ta-da! They're your kids. So, and I actually have some curricula. I go into detail about how I got it done in the book. The book starts with what's wrong with our school system. And one of the things that's wrong with our school system is that it taught you that you're inadequate. I'll just say that. And if you're going to argue with me, then stop telling me that you're inadequate to educate your children at home. And then I win again. But so my son's already read Fountainhead. I think Atlas Shrugged is a little bit advanced. So I'm holding off on that one, even though that one's my favorite. But I will say that if you're pulling your hair out and you're saying, I just don't know how to get this done. One part of the joy of education should be learning how to learn. So what you want to do is model for your child how to learn. So if you don't know, perfect, because now you can really model for the child how to learn it. And then the other trick is, we don't maybe realize this, but in the textbook, the answer's right there. So we're used to, the teacher has to teach me the thing because otherwise I can't learn it because the teacher has to show me. No, it's all in the textbook. In fact, I was on an interview earlier today, and the gal said that her daughter's a super achiever, but that she can't learn the stuff from the teacher because the teacher doesn't make any sense to her. So she comes home and she reads the chapter and she learns it from reading the chapter. Well, this is a girl who's finally figured out for herself how to learn, how to teach herself. And that's what we want for our children, because the fact is that your kid's going to have 3, 6, 5 careers before the age of 30. And they need to have that facility to just be able to teach themselves something new so that they can look, as we know, technology is changing everything so quickly. You need to have that flexibility. And so what we want to put in our children, we want to engender in them an innate love of learning, which they're born with, but somehow they get beaten out of them by the time they graduate high school. I don't know if you remember graduating high school, But at the end of high school, I was like done. I didn't want to learn anything else. It was.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think my experience in high school was what primed me to become such a fierce admirer of Ayn Rand, because in high school, I was bullied. I was different. My parents, you know, I was born in India. I was, you know, new to town, and I like to dress up and I like to do weird things, you know, and so I got bullied in my life, really not for, you know, the usual things that we hear people being bullied about, having a handicap, although, you know, someone may argue I have a few of those, but for virtues, you know, rather than shortcomings. And that just kind of opened my mind to the fact that the virtuous, the people that are the atlases, people that are kind of pulling the wagon, are sometimes targeted, not, you know, for their shortcomings, but for the best that they bring forward. So now that we find ourselves in this situation, Sam, and where everybody is turning, it's a default, you know, there's kind of no alternative to homeschooling. What are some of the reasons why we should, you know, parents might want to consider this as a longer term solution for their families?
Well, one reason might be that they don't assign Ayn Rand as reading material in our schools.
Well,
I consider that and go, so what are they assigning? And you might want to take a look at what they're assigning.
yeah,
And in fact, in this period that we have right now, we have a lot of curriculum that's going home with the kids that the parents are now sort of in charge of administering, if you will. Take a look at it, really examine it.
yeah,
And you can go to coronavirushomeschooling.com and look at what we're offering for lesson plans and compare and contrast. Because you might decide, here's the thing, we're not educating in our schools as much as we are schooling. And that's why the majority of youth voted for Bernie Sanders over both Hillary and Trump combined. There were more votes for Grandpa, for socialism, than there were for whatever Clinton represents and Trump.
yeah.
So,
Well,
and I'm just saying the reason for that is because they're being taught socialism. And if you have any doubt, let me just put it to rest. Socialism is communism, and Bernie Sanders is a communist. And I don't care what he calls himself. He went to Russia for his honeymoon. He had the communist flag on his desk for many, many, many years. He's never given up his dreams of communism. The way he behaved around a prisoner in Cuba ought to convince you of that. There's no, unfortunately, there's no helping that, okay? And so now we have our children that are graduating from our public schools voting for a socialist, for America. And that's dangerous, because if we're raising a generation plus more than a generation of these young socialists, I don't know where this country's going to end up. So it's a clarion call. And I think that there's a great opportunity here for parents to see that. If you value your traditional values or your conservative values or your libertarian values, you ought to take a deep, hard look at home education. It's not as hard as you think, and it's more rewarding than you ever dreamed. And part of the reason is because home education gives you the opportunity to have a relationship with your child that you otherwise cannot have. You can't have it.
and it's not just that they're teaching socialism. There's something far more insidious. I mean, socialism and communism, that's the political ideology that our children are being indoctrinated with. But beneath that, the ground level is the values. Okay, and it's not just this virus of socialism, but it's the values of victimhood, or the vices,
Right.
of resentment of the successful, of entitlement, of helplessness, of greed, as Ayn Rand properly described it, the desire for the unearned. So they're really getting not just bad politics, but also really, really bad values that they're being indoctrinated with. So speaking of Ayn Rand, Sam, I know because we've shared this, as neighbors and as friends in the past. But tell us a little bit about your Ayn Rand origin story, because I also just think it's really very important in terms of the big tent. You're also a woman of faith, of very traditional conservative family values. So tell us about how you discovered it and what it means to you, and also why we might consider it to be relevant in what we're living through right now.
Well, I will. Before I get into that, when I talk about socialism and communism, of course, I'm including the value system. And it's actually what I like to call the worldview. And right now we have a struggle between two worldviews. And it's playing out in real time right in front of us. So China's worldview is that life has no value. And the Judeo-Christian worldview that we exercise here in the United States is that life does have value. Every life has value for the most part, right? And so when you have that battle, you have a nation that doesn't care if they infect the world with a virus that, according to my research, is very clearly a virus that was created in a lab for a purpose. And the purpose must be infecting humans because it's a virus that began as a non-human virus and now is a human virus because of things that were grafted onto it. And so for that reason, and the segue, of course, to Ayn Rand is that she valued individuals. And she said that some individuals rise higher than other individuals and that that's a good thing. And that's an intrinsically American value. That's why we all love our iPhones or our IBM computers or what have you, because we understand that when great people are allowed to rise, great things happen for everybody. So to talk a little bit about wealth creation, when you talk about the creation of wealth, the socialist communist sees wealth as a finite pie, but the capitalist or libertarian sees wealth as being able to be generated. Well, of course it can be generated. The whole world is so much wealthier than we were 100 years ago. We're living longer, we're eating better, we're not dying in infancy. Like there are myriad improvements that we've made, and those improvements have come with the generation of wealth. So the generation of wealth comes from the exchange, the free exchange, I should say, of goods and services. It's the free exchange of those goods and services. So if I have a book and you have $20, I have a ton of these books, but I'd like your $20. You have a bunch of $20 bills. Give me $20, you get a book. You're better off because you're wealthier, because you're going to learn some stuff. And I'm better off because I didn't need the book, but the $20 is going to be useful to me, right? And wealth is suddenly we're both wealthier, and it's come about almost by magic. And that's the generation of wealth. So let's extend that for just a minute to information. And what the leftist seeks to do is suppress information. That's why we didn't learn about the coronavirus in time to prevent its infecting the United States. That's why the director of WHO is now, his head really should be on the chopping block, because he's the one who suppressed the information and told us, hey, there's no problem here. In fact, there were other people who are still in decision-making positions in the United States who tried to reassure everybody, there's no problem. Go to the Chinese parade. There's nobody that's infected there, and it's not going to get you anyway because it's totally safe. And now we're all on lockdown because of those people disseminating misinformation and not allowing the free exchange of information. And what do we see on campuses today? We see silencing of any political, any thought that does not agree with whatever the people who are in control believe, okay? And that is also seeking to impoverish us. And so we have impoverishment by the socialist ideology, but that ideology permeates into academia. And so we have impoverishment of intellectual wealth.
Yes,
and Ayn Rand fought against both of those things, and that's why I'm such a huge fan, because she recognized that it was a blanket, right? We have to remove the whole blanket. We can't just peek under here and disregard on the other end.
And she celebrated, heroism, like your
Oh yeah.
movies do. She celebrated heroism. She celebrated people of achievement. So much of the culture, and you've also argued this as well in talking about Hollywood, that just kind of lionizes dysfunction and neurosis and the dark side, but the literature of Ayn Rand, which is truly great epic literature, celebrates, the best in men, although she also really did capture some pretty incredible villains. Well,
Oh, absolutely. But that's what makes her book so seminal, is that she shows both sides of the coin. So there's no doubt in your mind, who's on the side of the good and who's not. And that's why Atlas Shrugged is still my favorite, will always be my favorite of her books, because the villains are so
they're very cringeworthy. But also, I think one of the reasons that Atlas Shrugged resonates with both of us is who's, I mean, we'll talk the heroes of Atlas Shrugged. It's actually Dagny Taggart. It was a strong, independent businesswoman who was running a company despite people trying to make her life harder. I mean, so many of the heroines of Ayn Rand's literature, Kira and We the Living, were women, and so I think it's also something to be celebrated, not just in terms of her heroic representation of individualism, but also women in what they could accomplish at a time when that wasn't really always considered the norm. So,
well, I mean, I think it was an expression of sort of the original feminism, right?
yeah,
But what I love about it is she made no bones about it. She's not like, and I'm woman and therefore this. No, I am business person, and therefore this is what I do, this is how I believe, and this is how I will behave. And so in that, she was the woman who basically ushered in her novels, in any case, equality of the sexes, because
yeah,
it wasn't like she's better than, she's less than, she's equal. There was equality.
and there was
Never,
individuality. She wasn't talking about group rights and group
right.
grievances. But one of the other things, and I think we'll end it here, is one of the other things. Let's be frank, that was not in Ayn Rand's literature, which there wasn't much. I mean, she did have the essay about the Comparticos in terms of education, but in her fiction, there wasn't much about children, which is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to have this alliance and to get your contributions to objectivist thought and perspective, because you have a lot of children, you've thought a lot about it, you've written a book about it, and now is a time when we need to start to think from an objectivist lens about education and about homeschooling options. So I'm really
Yeah.
grateful to
Because
you, my friend.
children grow up to be adults.
And the values that they learn now are the values that they're going to be preaching
Yeah.
to the next generation. So we're grateful. Happy Easter, and I will talk to you on the other side, my dear.
All right. Good Pesach.
Okay, thanks. Take care.